Live.
So hi there, my name is Gekowski. I'm an environmental photojournalist. Many people call me Bertie. I have spent about the last 10 years working on stories around the world about marine conservation. I worked on the dive series From Below. I was the presenter on that. We made Borneo from below, Indonesia from below, Timor-Leste from below for Scuba Zoo TV. And I'm here today to talk a bit about documenting stories of marine conservation and how we can use our skills as photographers to tell important stories. Everyone knows that the oceans are in great trouble. They're filling with plastic, they're polluted, they're rising, they're overfished. So I have spent a lot of time looking at some of the stories that impact our oceans, everything from shark fishing, manta fishing, plastic pollution, bycatch. I've looked at many different stories of marine conservation around the world. So I'm going to talk today about some of the stories that I've been working on and offer up some photographic tips in the process. So here, let me start by sharing my screen. So before I start, a lot of people often ask me how I got into this industry. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about my history. And then one of the first jobs that I did about marine conservation that set me off on the path that I'm on today. This is one of my favorite quotes: "Pen and camera are weapons against oblivion. They can create awareness of that which may soon be lost forever," by a well-known wildlife conservationist called George Schaller. And that's how I look at the camera. I look at it as this tool for good. And I view photography as almost like modern day fossils. They are relics or artifacts of things that might be gone in decades from now or even years from now. We are in the middle of a sixth mass extinction. We are losing species at an incredible rate, around 30,000 species a year. And the photographs that we take have great historical importance now, and we're going to be looking back at these shots in many years to come and remembering what life was like when we had manta rays, or we had great white sharks, or we had elephants or lions. That might seem like a bit of a bleak view, but unfortunately that is the current situation that we find ourselves in, that many of these species, unless we change our ways, are soon going to be gone forever. I actually started off working in the corporate world in London. I had a modeling agency for many years. I also worked as a copywriter for advertising agencies. And I was, probably a bit of a twat. I used to, go to nice parties and live the sort of London life and the London dream. But then I started looking in the mirror and I didn't like what I saw. So I realized that I had to change things up. And it was one day at Christmas time, and we were playing the alter ego game, where everyone begins to talk about the person they would be in another lifetime. And I was David Attenborough, and this was about 10 years ago. And I went away from that chat and I thought, that's crazy to spend your entire life fantasizing about living someone else's life. So I went to bed, couldn't sleep, and then decided I was going to get rid of everything in my life, get rid of all my possessions, my house, my business, and I was going to embark on a wildlife filmmaking course in Africa. All of it crazy at the time, but I went ahead and did it, and that was 10 years ago, and things have very much changed. So after doing the wildlife filmmaking course at the Kruger National Park in South Africa, I traveled to Mozambique. I bought myself a cheap underwater camera and housing, and I decided that I wanted to learn about underwater filming. Didn't know anything about diving or the oceans or excuse me, or Africa. But I just wanted to wholeheartedly throw myself in and learn. And I very coincidentally met two guys who were making a documentary about shark finning. This is my colleagues, Chris Scarp and Dave Charlie. So I volunteered to help them out. And they wanted a photographer. Again, I didn't know anything about photography, but I bought a camera. And I went on a 2-year mission with them to document the shark finning issues along the Mozambican coastline. Got a 3,000 kilometer coastline here in Mozambique, very badly patrolled. We have maybe only one patrol boat in the whole of Mozambique. They've sold the fishing rights to Chinese fishing companies, and these waters have been plundered. And as a result, all the local fishermen have had to adapt their ways. So this was the start of our documentary. Our documentary is called Shiver, and it was all about shark finning along the Mozambican coastline. And this was, we spent a lot of time living with the shark fishermen along the coast. And this was one of their small huts. This was actually the hut that we lived in for a few weeks, and you can see the shark gills outside. And the fishermen would go every single day, and they would try and catch sharks. And 10 years ago, they used to catch between 8 and 10 sharks a day. And when we went there, they hadn't caught a single shark in 6 months. The reason for that is all of the illegal and unregulated fishing along the coast, particularly Chinese trawlers. And this was how they would go, and they would fish every single day out on these small boats. That was me in the boat next to them. This was a snaggletooth weasel shark that they caught, and no one had ever seen, or I think there was one other account of people managing to document snaggletooth weasel sharks, and they'd actually managed to catch it on one of their lines. We didn't know what it was at the time. We knew it was an unusual shark, so we took it back to the Marine Megafauna Foundation, and Dr. Andrea Marshall managed to successfully ID the shark. So it's very sad that there's these sharks in these waters here that we know absolutely nothing about, and yet here we have a documentation of it, but it is dead. This was a bull shark. So when we stayed with the shark fishermen, after 2 weeks of trying to catch sharks every single day, they managed to, you have to excuse me, I'm actually still recovering from pneumonia, so I've still got quite a bad chest, as you can probably hear. So this was a large bull shark that they caught. And for a shark like this, they could make up to a month's wages. They could make about a couple of $100 for the large fins of a bull shark like this. And then the meat would go on to feed the families. This was one of the first shots that I took when I started to realize the power of photography. It was one of my earliest shots, and I still think one of the most important shots that I feel I've ever taken. It was very widely published, got a lot of exposure. Using a technique called close focus wide angle, which is something I use a lot in photography. Using a wide angle lens, get close to your subject, gives it that looming in, very visceral type of feeling, and also means that you can incorporate your background as well. So as an environmental photojournalist, this is a very important technique because it allows you to tell different elements of a story. So you have the fisherman enjoying his catch, you have this bull shark that's just looming into the camera, blood all over it. And I think a good example of a powerful photograph. And so the entire community came out when the fishermen brought the shark in, and they were celebrating, they were running down the beach, they were so happy because they hadn't caught a shark in so long, and the money from this one animal would be then used to feed the entire village. Unfortunately, these sharks are also laden with methyl mercury. So we took a sample from it and we sent it off to South Africa, and we found out that this shark contained 2,000% of the recommended daily dose of methylmercury. So very dangerous for the fishermen to be eating it so much. Particularly dangerous for pregnant women, can cause birth defects and other effects from poisoning. So this was, the film was then shown at, shown all over Mozambique actually for many years. In fact, it's still shown today, even though this was 10 years ago. So this is the entire crew. You have the presenter Carlos, you have the cameraman Chris Scarf, the producer Dave Charlie, photographer CJ, and myself. And then I started to send all the images off to different magazines. I'd never really written for magazines before, but then I started sending them off and getting the story widely out there. And this was actually published in FHM magazine. So after that, I started to write about different stories around Africa and traveling around the continent and looking at different stories about human-animal conflict. This was when I trained as a ranger in Zimbabwe. This was a story I did about seal cull in Namibia. 80,000 seals are culled every single year in Namibia. People don't really know about it, like they know about what happens in Canada. But this is a huge story, and we drove across all of southern Africa in a beaten up yellow Mercedes. Bits of the car would fall off along route, but we made it in the end. And this was a piece that I did about a gentleman who lost both of his legs in a motorbike accident, and we traveled across Africa with him, raising awareness for small NGOs. And this was a piece I did for National Geographic about the tortoise mafia. So many tortoises are exported every year from Madagascar and used in the exotic pet trade. And this was a photograph that I took on the edge of a cliff in remote southern Madagascar. You have these beautiful tortoises wandering around, and this was the sun was rising. You're at the edge of a cliff. You have these amazing animals just there, and it's sometimes all of these elements just come together and mean that you can create that perfect photograph. If you're looking to have the right setting, an interesting animal displaying some kind of interesting behavior in dramatic lighting. From there, I went and started, I got approached by Simon Christopher and went to work for Scuba Zoo TV. And they were starting a new channel in Malaysia. So I moved to Borneo, and we basically produced a series of web shows, and they were all based around conservation around the Coral Triangle. We did some that were based in the jungle, and we did some underwater shows. If anyone is interested in seeing them, they're on Scuba Zoo TV. And then, so we did shows Timor-Leste from below, Indonesia from below, Borneo from below, Borneo Jungle Diaries, Borneo Wildlife Warriors. And the idea was to shine a light on people working in conservation within Sabah and trying to get their message out there and trying to make conservation fun and entertaining and accessible to everyone. As part of Borneo from Below, we did, one of the episodes we did was about the Bajau Laut, or the sea gypsies in Sabah. The Bajau Laut traditionally spent their entire lives living out on the open oceans, and they would never set foot on land. This was one of the families that we filmed with, and I think you can count here like 10 people living on just one houseboat. But that's the way that they've been doing it for generations. And they don't, in fact, they don't like setting foot on land. They get land sick in the same way that we get seasick. So this is one of their boats. You can see the bottom left. And this is a settlement that they have been now having to form on land. Because our oceans are so catastrophically overfished, it means that the livelihoods of the Bajau who depend upon the oceans for their survival is under threat. So they've now had to create these settlements on land. Most of them don't want to, they still want to be living out on the boats, but they have no choice because they cannot afford to be using their boats and traveling around in order to catch such small stocks. So they have noticed huge changes in the ocean over the generations as a result of overfishing. One of the species that the Bajau now target, so traditionally they would target pelagic species, but now they're looking at other species such as Mantis Shrimp, which have become a delicacy, particularly for the tourism market around Asia. And we went out with this one Bajau fisherman, and it took him half a day of scouring the seabed to find just one mantis shrimp. And this is how they would catch them, using this little trap with a piece of string and a bit of metal attached to it, and they would set a trap for the mantis shrimp, hook it, pull it out of its burrow, and then store it in a plastic bottle for safekeeping, and then send them to the fishing markets all over Sabah. Along with catching mantis shrimp, the Bajau would also target seahorses. And this was a shot I took of when this gentleman spent, again, huge amount of time just to try and catch some seahorses, which they would then collect. They would then set up on lines. They would dry these seahorses alive, which is pretty brutal. And then they would sell them, and then the seahorses used in traditional medicine, often sold as pairs, the male and female. They're then ground up and then made into a tea that people drink. Again, this was another shot that I found quite powerful, also using close focus wide angle. I just wish the fisherman was wearing his traditional goggles. Unfortunately, he's got a normal mask on. But there he is, proudly showing his catch. One of the other stories that we worked on was about Dr. Nick Pilcher, and Dr. Pilcher is going to be on a panel that I'm hosting at 12 o'clock. And Dr. Pilcher would perform studies and surveys around the Borneo coastline. And he would then use his scientific data in order to form policies to help to protect these animals. So, for example, Dr. Pilcher, through his studies, found that almost all of the turtles around the coastline were turning out to be female. And that was simply as a result of Sabah Parks had actually moved some of the nests, and they'd moved them to a place with too much shade. And as we all know, a turtle's sex is determined by the heat of the nest. So what they were getting was all these female turtles being born. So they simply removed the shade, and that helped to balance out the sex ratio. But without Dr. Pilcher's work, they'd never have known that. They'd have carried on doing it, and it could have led to catastrophic implications for the local turtle populations. Here's a shot that I took, quite a unique shot, I think, of Dr. Pilcher, this was the way he would catch the turtles. He would actually jump on top of them and wrestle them. It's called turtle wrangling. So he'd jump on top of them and then grab them and then take them onto the boat. There's no safe way to catch turtles, but this is a way that it's thought causes the least amount of stress on these animals. Here's a picture of Dr. Pilcher wrangling a turtle. And it's very quick, he'll spot a turtle, jump off a boat, jump on top of it, grab the turtle, put it onto the boat, and then perform some tests, and then release the turtle. This was a story I did in Timor-Leste about a group of people called the Wawatatopu. And the Wawatatopu are a group of females who lived on a small island called the Toro. which is thought to be the most biodiverse island in the world in terms of coral diversity. And these ladies, they're part of a fishing community, but traditionally it was the men who would go out fishing. But they decided, why is it the men who should go and earn all of the money? So they took it upon themselves to learn free diving. And they would go out and they would go free diving for fish and spearfishing on a daily basis. And they would do it in their beautiful traditional clothing and flip-flops and handmade goggles. Again, this was a picture that I really liked, using a wide-angle lens. A lot of the time for portraits, photographers will use a 50mm or an 85mm, which compresses the face a lot. But if you use a wide-angle lens and get close to your subject, it means that you get much more detail in the face. So here I wanted all of her moles to stand out, all of her pores. I wanted to give it this very comfortable feeling of her looming into the camera. Again, it's just much more immersive. It makes you feel part of the scene as the viewer. Another area that I have been covering is wildlife tourism. So I've been looking at the impact on dolphins being used in the wildlife tourism industry. These are traveling circuses in Indonesia, and these dolphins are transported between events. They're often taken in stretchers, covered in Vaseline, and then driven across venues in Indonesia. They are then forced to perform tricks in these small chlorinated pools. And these pools are not only do they make the dolphins turn blind, but of course it impacts the dolphins' echolocation that they use to communicate. So when the dolphins are in there and they're communicating to each other, it's bouncing off these walls, and it's a source of massive stress to these animals. So these circuses are wrong for dolphins in so many ways. They really impact on their physical and mental well-being. Thankfully, they just got banned due to pressure from animal rights groups. So very recently, they're no longer legal within Indonesia. These are some of the tricks that the dolphins would be forced to perform. And although these shows have been made illegal in Indonesia, around the world, dolphins are still used in huge shows, and not just in Indonesia, not just across Asia, but everywhere, all over the planet, dolphins are still used. Dolphins, people often talk about the educational value of these shows, about whether you go away with a renewed appreciation for marine life, but most of the time there's no educational value. It's just simply a form of exploitation, and people come away knowing nothing about dolphins. It's just a way for us to satisfy our selfish needs and be entertained. And then at the end of the show, people would pose for photographs. Social media has been hugely harmful for animals in captivity, and the lengths that people will go to get a selfie with an animal. This was a show in Taman Safari in Indonesia that I went to, and you can see the size of the crowd versus the size of the area that the dolphins are forced to perform. And again, these big glitzy shows where the dolphins might have more room, but it doesn't make it any less stressful for them. Forced to perform these pointless tricks and then pose at the end of the show for selfies. I find this quite a poignant image. I'll often try and get eye contact with your subject. It just makes the viewer feel much more of a sense of intimacy. This was a story that I did about bycatch. It was the first ever show for Discovery Channel, first ever conservation show for Shark Week on Discovery Channel. This was shot about 2 years ago in Florida, in fact. And it looked at the impact of fisheries on shark populations. So we went and we spent a little bit of time on a shrimp trawler in Florida. And I had this shot in mind before getting on the trawler. I wanted to show the impact that the industry had on other marine species. Typically, shrimp trawlers produce around 90% bycatch. So for every 1 kilo of prawns that are caught, there are 9 kilos of bycatch. And these bycatch, as you can see from this picture, could be any animals. We've got mantis shrimp, we've got pufferfish, we've got squid, we've got crabs, we've got coral, and pretty much everything is just scooped up in these trawlers and then discarded overboard. And the trawlers will go over the same patch of seabed over and over and over again until the seabed is destroyed, which is just something to have a think about anytime you go and you order shrimp at a restaurant. Remember that for that plate of shrimp, you have 10 times the amount of bycatch. There's animals that have died just for you to eat that portion of shrimp. We also spent time out on the high seas in South Africa. And here there are perfectly legal longliners operating. And on every long line, for every hook, there was a dead shark. This long line went on for 5 kilometers. And it had long lines placed at about every 30 meters, every 50 meters. On every long line was about 3 or 4 hooks. On every hook was a dead shark. And that was just, a random day out on the ocean in South Africa. There must have been, thousands of dead sharks caught by that long line. I mean, it's pretty incredible that any sharks managed to survive at all. So this was a picture that I took amongst bouts of seasickness. Horrific churning seas in South Africa. And this was jumping in the water. I had my camera with me, and I'm so ill, vomiting everywhere. And then I just got sharks coming to attack me from all angles. I've got maybe 10 mako sharks and blue sharks that are attracted by my vomit, smashing into me, smashing into the camera. And at that point in time, you don't care whether you live or die. You feel that sick. You just simply want to die. For any one of you who gets seasick out there, I know it's a bit ironic for underwater photographers, but it's a highly miserable experience. So yeah, everyone kind of thinks that it's quite glamorous working in this industry, but I can assure you it's not at all. You often put yourselves in sort of quite dangerous situations, working under all sorts of conditions in order to get these images. People can see more of my work on my website, aaronjekowski.com, or follow me on Instagram, Aaron_Gekowski. So thank you for listening. If anyone has any questions, feel free just to get in touch. I'm here to answer them at any point. Sorry about my slightly bad chest. Hopefully going to be getting over this relentless pneumonia very soon. But thanks for listening, and let me know if you have any questions.
Hi, Aaron. There's a question. Yeah. Is there any time in your work experiences that you feel fearful of the condition that you're facing?
Yeah, certainly that was one of them. When you're surrounded by a school of sharks in your own vomit, that is certainly a time where I felt in danger. I've been chased by elephants multiple times in the jungles and in the African bush. I'm trying to think of times that I've had. Most of the time, there's very few occasions where we are actually threatened by wildlife. Most animals just want to be left alone. We are the biggest danger. So most of the problems that I've encountered have been due to people. It's zoo owners who are upset because I've exposed their zoo. It's gangsters or mafia type people who want to try and protect their business interests. So most of the time there's not that much danger posed by animals themselves. we're the real monster in all of this.
So true. Recently they have this story about someone feeding a pineapple filled with firecrackers to
Yes.
an elephant in if I'm not wrong, is in Sri Lanka, if I'm not wrong. Oh, sorry, it's Kerala. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that one? And is that something that is cultural or is just human behavior?
It's something you see all over the world. People going to extreme lengths in order to try and protect their livelihoods. So whether it is, farmers going and shooting lions, or whether it is people poisoning elephants, or people laying traps like pineapples for elephants, you have to remember that when elephants go and destroy crops, it's like them going and taking all of the money out of your bank account. So we might hear about it and say, oh my God, that's terrible. How could people do that? But without their livelihoods, people will starve. I'm not in any way condoning that, but I'm just saying that there has to be other methods to try and protect people and to try and safeguard people's crops and people's bank accounts. So these cases are never kind of a case of black and white. There's often many shades of grey in between. It's the most horrific thing to do, and you can imagine the death that animal suffered. But we need to try and, the governments need to try and mitigate these human-animal conflicts as best they can so these things don't happen.
So I just have just a personal question. You being an environmental, what do you call this, documentary journalist, I'm sure you have seen a lot of experiences or a lot of incidences where it affected you emotionally. Do you have a couple that you can share with us?
Oh my word, they all affect me emotionally. That's why I've been doing this for so long now, and it's the cumulative impact of working on these stories that has a real effect on you. You go from story to story to story, thinking that actually they don't have an impact and you can deal with it. But then suddenly, after a while, you start to notice the physical and the emotional impacts on yourself. And that's, why I'm sitting here getting over pneumonia, is because I just pushed myself too hard, and I've actually made myself sick over the last year. I haven't stopped, and I've gone to, I think I must have gone to like 20 odd countries last year in order to report on animal cruelty. And eventually those stories take their toll. I think it was one particular story that really had an impact was on dog eating in Cambodia. And I'd just been on the back of a very intense film mission, but I got offered the opportunity to do this, and it was a story that I'd always wanted to cover because I think it's something, particularly in Cambodia, that doesn't get enough publicity. 3 million dogs are killed there every year, and they suffer the most horrendous deaths. They are often drowned alive in these drowning pits. They're then sent off to countries around the world, and then people will eat these dogs, and 50% of them have rabies. And to see these dogs rounded up from the streets and to be shoved into cages and then drowned alive was a pretty harrowing thing. I think maybe that had so much impact because we associate dogs. The dogs are man's best friend. They're animals that are loyal, that we use as companions. And they're intelligent, they're sentient beings, and to see them suffering in this manner really took its toll on me, and it still does. I still have nightmares about that job. But it's not just that; it's other jobs that I've worked on. Seeing so many different animals chopped up alive in front of you, or to see the wildlife tourism industry where the animals suffer daily. So it's not like with the dogs where they get rounded up and then they're dead within a day. these animals endure a lifetime of suffering. So that's why I find wildlife tourism a particularly important subject that needs covering.
Just out of curiosity, have you actually been to the Wuhan in China to see the market, wildlife market?
I haven't. No, I have been to many other wet markets around the world. I went recently to Jatinegara market in Jakarta, where they have, that's still actually operating now. They have many different species that are used there for as bushmeat or for the exotic pet trade. And the conditions that these animals are kept in are horrific. Shoved into cages in the boiling sun, left to swelter there all day with no food and no water. And then people will come along and they will slaughter them and consume them. And the fact that you're still able to go to Jakarta now and buy bats out on the street, despite the fact that we know that bats are the likely source of COVID, that bats harbor 150 different diseases that are, some of which are communicable to humans, is absolutely mind-boggling. So really there needs to be more. I know they have moved in Wuhan to ban these markets, but they need to do this, it needs to be done worldwide. Because if we keep allowing it to happen, then we will keep getting pandemics like this, except the next one could be a lot worse than this.
So, Aaron, have you always wanted to be, what is it that you're doing right now since you're a child?
No, as a child, I wanted to write adverts. I wanted to work for ad agencies, and I was obsessed with jingles, and I was obsessed with. I knew every advert on TV. I don't know why. I just found it a very interesting, very creative industry. So I wanted to do that. I did love wildlife films growing up. We were all brought up in England with David Attenborough, and he was a huge source of inspiration to me. So it wasn't until sort of my 20s that I started to, it was then when I was working in the business world, and I would, at the end of the day, I would go and I would watch wildlife documentaries to relax and switch off and catapult myself into another world. So it wasn't actually until a little bit later in life that I decided I wanted this career change. So for anyone watching this, it's never too late. And if you really have a yearning to do something like this, then you only have one life, and you have to follow your dreams, as cheesy as that might sound.
As you said, it's never too late. When was the career switch done at?
Sorry, say that again?
As you said, it's never too late to have a career switch. So at what age did you decide to actually jump into being this?
It was at age 28, I think. I'm now 39. So I've been doing this for 11 years. And luckily, by age of 28, I had a house in London. I'd saved up a bit of money from the modeling industry. I could rent my house out in London and make a bit of income from that. Because it's really not easy to make it in this world and to make it in this industry. You have to work a lot for free whilst you build your name and you build your reputation. People often contact me saying, I want to be a conservation photographer. Like, what do I do? How do I get into the industry? And I've said many times, it's not easy. You have to be 100% dedicated to it. Ideally, you have to have other sources of income. And you have to be prepared to work for many years whilst you build up your skill set and you build up your contacts and, most importantly, build your reputation.
Right. Okay. So, Aaron, you've been doing this for slightly more than a decade now. What would your advice for anyone, maybe the youth, or if not, those mid-age careers changes, if they want to choose this path, And what advice would you give them, one thing? And if they want to pursue underwater photography, but then towards the angle of environmentalism, um, what kind of advice would you give them as well?
I'd be a doctor instead. Study law. Don't do it. I think my advice would be the same to both questions and to both sets of people. First of all, you have to start by building up your knowledge and building up your skill set. So that might be watching YouTube tutorials. There's many amazing photographers who give really good tutorials and webinars. Reading books, and just immerse yourself in photography. Just consume, and start to take an analytical approach to photography and looking at images that you love and why you love them, and how the photographer took shots like that, what lenses they used, what techniques they used, how they might have approached the scene. As photographers, we make dozens of split-second decisions when we approach a scene, where the light is, how your subject is behaving, what the story is that you want to tell. That's the most important thing, is what emotion you want to get across, because the image is a reflection, ultimately, not just of the subject and the story, but the image is a reflection of the photographer and our particular views on the subject. So you're making, many split-second decisions that reflect your emotions. And then send off your images to people that you respect, to people whose opinion you might want. Try and get critique on your images, and try and grow as a photographer. And then when you feel like you've got to a point where you're moving your photography along and it's going in the right direction, then you might want to submit to competitions, submit to magazines, try and get your work out there in the public domain as much as possible. Photography is ever evolving discipline. We're learning all the time, and there's not a single photographer on the planet who isn't learning from other people. So you can also, look to volunteer with other photographers that you respect. It doesn't matter if they're conservation photographers or not. They could be fashion. They could be focused on corporates, but you're always learning. I volunteered with a fashion photographer recently, and I learned so much about lighting. It was amazing, and I can apply some of that to my environmental work. So those are probably my best tips, is just, immerse yourself, learn, work with other photographers, submit your work to competitions, to magazines, try and get yourself more of a public face. Work on your social media, of course, is very important. It's a necessary evil. And then, expect it to take a lot of time. It takes many years, like with any discipline in life. In order for you to be able to master it, then you have to put in the work.
Okay, thank you so much, Aaron. But one last question before we close for the session. At this point of time where everything is so uncertain, and amidst we are in the period of COVID-19, and a lot of travel restriction has been imposed, and it's only recently that it is slowly lifting to have this ability for people to travel a bit, but of course not anytime very soon. I just want to know, what would your expectation, or what would you have in terms of expectation for what would you see in the environment? Like, how would the ocean be? And are you excited to just explore that ocean? And if it's not the ocean, how about other parts of the environment, like forests or something?
Good question. What changes will there be to wildlife populations because of coronavirus? I think it could go both ways. I think on the one hand, a lot of wildlife, we've seen images from around the world of herds of elephants congregating that haven't been seen together in many, many years, or species recovery. So I think on the one hand, it's given us a bit of breathing space, but it's not enough time. It's only going to be, say, a year, maybe 18 months at max, that we've allowed wildlife to have a bit of time to take a breath. So whilst I think that there will be benefits on wild animal populations, I think ultimately it might be very short-lived, because we also have a lot of people out there who are struggling and who are starving, and that is going to lead to an increase in poaching and subsistence hunting as soon as all of this lifts. In fact, it would be leading to it now. There's absolutely no doubt that poaching in certain places is on the rise, simply because people have lost their livelihoods because of the current pandemic. And people have to make a living and they have to feed themselves. It's all very well us sitting here in our, in our nice houses and saying, oh, that's so terrible. How can you go out there and hunt an elephant or hunt, whatever other animal it is in order to feed yourself? But a hungry belly is a great motivator. That was a quote that I heard in a film. I can't remember. It was a lion poacher. And the guy kept being caught in Africa going out poaching lions. And he said, I make a lot of money for poaching one lion, and my family are all starving and I have to feed them. Again, I'm not condoning it, but I'm just saying it's very easy for us to judge if we haven't been in these people's shoes. Anyway, slightly going off the subject, I think it can be good and bad. I think there's no doubt that a lot of fishing fleets have been grounded. And they've been docked, so they're not out there every single day. But as soon as this ban gets lifted, you can guarantee that they will be there, and they will be trying to make up for the losses that they've had during the coronavirus pandemic. So, in short, I think, yes, there has been benefits to wild animal populations and definitely to the ocean, but I think these benefits are going to be short-lived, and what it takes is a long-term effort in order to really, have an impact on the state of our oceans and wild animal populations. This short-term effect isn't going to be enough.
Thank you, Aaron, for this sharing. It was, it was a different world altogether. And then I must say that it was very brave of you to want to pursue what is it that you always wanted to do, and just go with your heart. I think that itself is inspiring on its own. All right. So we look forward. So we look forward to see you later at the 12 p.m. panel. Thank you very much once again, and see you soon.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.